She walked into the parking lot like it was any other day, a newlywed, picking up dinner and a fresh apron for a quiet evening at home with her husband. But just minutes later, she vanished. Forever. Her car was still there, spotless, locked, untouched. Inside, her purse, fresh groceries, even her wedding ring, carefully removed before driving. But Mary Shotwell Little, 25 years old, a model bank employee in Atlanta, was never seen again. No screams, no cameras, no witnesses, not a single trace. And then, her gas card was used. Hundreds of miles away, in another state, someone claimed to see her, tired, dazed, walking with two strange men. She didn't speak. She just stood there and signed her name. Years later, the only person to fill Mary's role at the bank, her replacement, was found murdered, stuffed into the trunk of her own car. Same city, same bank. Some say Mary knew something. Some believe she was silenced. Others think maybe she chose to disappear. This isn't just a missing person case. This is a warning we never listened to. And now it's time to tell her story, every detail, because Mary deserves to be remembered. Atlanta in the 1960s was a city in transition. Between the rising glass towers and the quiet, tree-lined suburbs were everyday lives unfolding, people chasing stability in a rapidly modernizing South. Mary Shotwell Little was one of them. She came from Charlotte, North Carolina, studied at the Women's College of Greensboro, and moved to Atlanta after graduation to take a job at Citizens and Southern, one of the region's largest banks at the time. Mary wasn't the type to turn heads on the street, but she had a gentle presence that made people feel instantly comfortable. Her soft smile and the way she always checked in on her coworkers brought warmth to even the dreariest Monday mornings. To her colleagues, she was dependable, meticulous, courteous, the kind of person who never missed work, unless absolutely necessary. She was not just a reliable employee, she was a trusted friend. Mary loved her job, but she didn't live to work. In letters to her mother, she wrote, "Atlanta's not like Charlotte, but I'm adjusting. People here are kind. I think I'll be okay." Just 6 weeks before she vanished, she had married Roy Little, a kind, soft-spoken auditor. They held a simple but joyful wedding and moved into a cozy apartment in Ansley Park, a quiet, middle-class neighborhood with white picket fences and shade trees. Mary picked out the curtains herself, planted flowers on the porch, and brought a book with her almost everywhere. She seemed like the kind of person destined for a peaceful, fulfilling life. But sometimes, calm surfaces hide deeper currents. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Mary began receiving mysterious bouquets at the office. No note, no name. Sometimes red roses. Other times, white carnations. She would smile awkwardly when coworkers asked about them, then changed the subject. A friend later recalled Mary once saying, "Someone's taking too much interest in me." But she never said, "Who?" They brushed it off as a secret admirer, a harmless prank. No one thought it could be anything more. But Mary also started acting strangely, not dramatically, just subtly off. Those closest to her sensed something was bothering her. One of her best friends remembered sitting with Mary at Saint-Tichès, lunch in the bank courtyard, when mid-conversation, Mary suddenly went quiet and whispered, "There's something, but I can't talk about it yet." When Bella pressed, she smiled and shifted the topic to the sandwich she'd just ordered. No one pushed. They figured she was just adjusting to married life, maybe dealing with something personal. But in hindsight, that moment now feels like a quiet alarm no one heard. Though newly married, Mary lived with quiet independence. She drove herself to work, went shopping, met friends. Roy, her husband, was reserved and often away on short business trips. They weren't flashy, but by all accounts, their marriage was strong. Mary would call her mother and talk about cooking, dinner together, walking around the neighborhood, watching old movies at the theater near Midtown. Her life seemed ordinary, uneventful. But then the little things began to pile up. Mary told a friend she had the feeling someone was following her. Nothing specific, just a sense. Once, while pumping gas, she thought someone was standing behind her. Another time, she found her car had been moved slightly, Someone had driven it, she believed, after she accidentally left the keys in her desk. Nothing was missing, but she said, "That feeling, it's like I can't breathe." She also mentioned strange phone calls at work. No voices, just soft breathing or silence on the other end. Once, she answered and only heard the wind. "Who is this?" she asked. The line went dead. She didn't tell Roy. She didn't call the police. Maybe she didn't want to make a fuss. Or maybe she'd grown used to facing it alone. To her friends, these were disconnected moments. A bouquet, a phone call, a passing shadow. But looking back, they feel like red pins on a map, all pointing toward the final evening Mary was seen. Thursday, October 14th, 1965. The day started like any other. Mary arrived at the bank on time, dressed neatly, with her hair pinned up. She processed paperwork, chatted with coworkers, and left at closing time. Her colleague, Carol, recalled Mary seemed cheerful. She even mentioned preparing Roy's favorite dinner that night, meatloaf. Mary had just bought a new apron, and she was excited to use it. That detail, the apron, would later become one of the last vivid images of her. A young wife, heading home with groceries and a quiet evening ahead, unaware it would be the last night she'd ever walk freely in her world. Mary had dinner plans with a friend at Lenox Square, then a lively shopping center where young women often gathered after work. They ate, chatted, and around 8 p.m., Mary said goodbye and walked toward the parking lot to retrieve her silver gray Mercury Comet. After that, she was never seen again. The next morning, she didn't show up for work. Her coworkers were immediately alarmed. Mary had never missed a day without calling. Phone calls went unanswered. Roy, who was away on business, rushed home in a panic. Police were notified. The search began. By midday, Mary's car was found in the Lenox Square parking lot, parked exactly where she'd left it. Nothing seemed out of place at first. The car was locked. Her groceries were still inside, along with her purse, the apron, and a paperback novel. But then came the strange details. One of her stockings had been cut. Small blood stains were found on the seat and gear shift. Her undergarments were folded and placed neatly between the front seats, as if someone had removed them and deliberately laid them there. A fine red dust clung to the car's exterior, the kind found on remote back roads far outside Atlanta. It was clear the car had been driven somewhere else and returned. But who drove it? Was Mary in the car? And if so, why didn't she scream for help? When Roy arrived at the scene, he was visibly shaken. Throughout the investigation, he cooperated fully. Calm, composed, eager for answers. No fights. No recorded tension in their marriage. To everyone who knew them, they seemed happy. Police combed through what little security footage existed, questioned night guards, scoured the parking lot. But no one saw or heard anything. No struggle. No screams. No signs of a woman leaving the lot. Mary didn't leave a note. Didn't run away. She simply vanished. In a crowded shopping center, in the middle of Atlanta, Atlanta police launched a full investigation the moment Mary was reported missing. Lenox Square's parking lot was sealed off. Mary's silver gray Mercury Comet was towed for inspection. On the surface, the car looked untouched. No broken windows, no forced entry. But the deeper investigators looked, the stranger inside all became a small bloodstain near the gear shift. One of her stockings, neatly sliced at the top. Several undergarments folded between the front seats. Not tossed, not rushed, but placed. Her shopping bags, including the apron and fresh groceries, remained untouched in the back seat. But what truly raised alarms was the reddish dust caked along the wheel wells and undercarriage. Forensic experts would later confirm this wasn't city dust. It came from the red clay roads found miles outside Atlanta, particularly to the south through stretches of undeveloped country. The evidence pointed to one chilling possibility. The car had been driven somewhere remote and then returned to its original parking spot at Lenox Square. But by whom? And where had Mary been in those missing hours? There were no witnesses, no screams, no struggle. A security guard on duty that night said he did a sweep of the lot around 10 p.m. but saw nothing unusual. He didn't remember seeing the car at that time. In fact, Security footage, grainy and incomplete, showed that the vehicle was missing from its space just after midnight. But by early morning, it was back. This meant someone had returned it, carefully, quietly. And that was the most unsettling part. Everything seemed deliberate. No damage, no theft, no signs of panic. If this was a random attack, the perpetrator had been remarkably methodical. If Mary disappeared on her own, she'd staged it with chilling precision, yet left no note, no goodbye, no explanation. Just 2 days later, the case took a surreal turn. The bank where Mary worked received an alert from a fuel company. Her gas card had been used, not once, but twice, in 2 separate cities, Charlotte and Raleigh, both in North Carolina, Mary's home state. Suddenly, the idea that she might still be alive seemed possible. But what unfolded at those gas stations only deepened the mystery. At the first station in Charlotte, the attendant said a man pulled up in a Mercury Comet. In the car was a young woman, brown hair, white blouse. She said nothing, eyes low. The man paid for the gas and told the woman to sign. The receipt, Mary Shotwell Little. She did. Then they drove off. Less than an hour later, 130 miles away in Raleigh, another station attendant gave a similar account. This time there were 2 men, one inside the car, one standing outside. The woman again signed the gas slip. Again, she didn't speak. But both attendants remembered the same thing. Her eyes looked vacant, hollow, like someone who wasn't free to speak, or was too afraid to. The receipts were real. The signatures nearly identical to Mary's banking documents. Investigators believed she had truly been there. Or, if not, someone had gone to great lengths to fake it, convincingly. But handwriting analysis made forgery unlikely, which left a haunting question. If Mary was alive, why didn't she call for help? Was she being threatened, controlled, or was she following a plan? Authorities scrambled. Law enforcement in North Carolina joined the search. They canvassed gas stations, hotels, highway stops. Nothing. No hotel bookings under her name. No usable camera footage. No sightings of the car after Raleigh. It was as if Mary had vanished. Again, just after that second signature. As the investigation expanded, it only grew more tangled. Some considered the possibility that Mary had chosen to disappear, that she was running from something. But everyone close to her rejected that idea. Mary had no debt, no secret lover, no offshore accounts, no signs of a getaway plan. She had just gotten married. She left behind groceries, a new apron, and her wedding ring, something she valued deeply. Still, the gas card incident opened a darker theory. Maybe Mary was being forced. Maybe her captors didn't want her dead. Not yet. Maybe they wanted to leave breadcrumbs. Or maybe they wanted to mislead. FBI profilers were brought in. They reviewed similar cases, regional crime patterns, even organized rings. Some questioned whether it tied back to Mary's cryptic comment weeks earlier when she hinted at something she couldn't talk about. Something possibly tied to the bank. But again, no proof, just shadows and silence. The disappearance of Mary Shotwell Little stunned Atlanta, and soon the entire country. A woman vanished in public, in a well-lit lot, with traces left behind like a script too perfect. Her case became one of the most chilling mysteries of the 1960s. Her family waited. Police kept searching, but as days turned to weeks and weeks to months, hope began to fade. Then, nearly 2 years later, another name surfaced. And what had once seemed like an isolated tragedy suddenly felt like something far more sinister. Nearly 2 years after Mary vanished, a shocking development would reignite what many believed was a cold and fading investigation. In the summer of 1967, a young woman named Diane Shields, also a bank employee at Citizens and Southern, was found dead in the trunk of her own car. The vehicle had been abandoned in a parking lot not far from where Mary had last been seen. But what sent chills through the investigation wasn't just the brutality of the crime. It was the eerie parallels. Diane had once worked at the exact same desk Mary occupied before she disappeared. She hadn't been robbed. Her purse and jewelry were untouched. There were no signs of sexual assault. No evidence of a struggle. She was found bound, a cloth stuffed into her mouth, her hands tied as if someone had wanted to silence her. The trunk had been locked from the outside. A passerby noticed the car had been sitting for 2 days under the sun, and when police opened the trunk, what they found stopped even the most seasoned detectives in their tracks, not just because of what they saw, but because it made them think, almost instinctively, of Mary Shotwell Little. Was this happening again? Initially, police denied any connection. Diane and Mary weren't close friends. They worked at different branches, but the media wasn't convinced. Headlines began to ask the questions. Was someone targeting women at the bank? Was this a warning, a cover-up, or something more organized? Fear crept through Atlanta. Some women quit. Others requested transfers. Offices that once felt secure now seemed shadowed by a quiet threat. Those who had worked with Mary began to feel as if they were characters in a story that still hadn't ended, and anyone could be next. Then a new voice emerged from inside a Georgia's prison. A man serving time, a former member of a theft ring, contacted police. He claimed to know of 2 men who had been paid $5,000 to kidnap a young woman from the Lenox Square parking lot, take her to North Carolina, and kill her. Theo. Timeline, 1965, the year Mary disappeared. Investigators reopened the files immediately. The inmate said he hadn't been involved, but heard the story firsthand in prison from one of the men. His details were disturbingly specific. A silver Mercury comet, a petite brunette, a banker vanishing. After dinner with a friend, he described red clay roads, a scarf, an abandoned site where they hid her. But there was a problem: no body, no second witness, and no confirmation of who the men were. The entire account was second-hand, and while some details matched the original investigation, many had already been reported in newspapers. He could have just remembered them. Legally, there wasn't enough to pursue charges. Still, the case was back in motion. Investigators began re-examining everyone connected to Mary, co-workers, regular bank clients, anyone with links to her life. A few names surfaced. None stood out. No one had a clear motive. Theories ranging from a private grudge to a hidden relationship to an internal secret were considered and dismissed one by one. The case again slipped into a fog of unanswered questions. But throughout it all, one sense remained unshaken. Mary knew something, and whatever that was, it cost her dearly. One of Mary's closest friends later shared a memory. About a week before she disappeared, Mary said she was thinking about telling the truth, about something she'd held inside too long. When asked what it was, she simply said, "If I speak, someone might get hurt. But if I don't know what'll happen." At the time, no one thought much of it. In hindsight, it sounded like a warning, a quiet, unheeded plea. Another detail troubled detectives. Just a week before, she went missing. Mary had reportedly visited HR to ask about the procedure for taking emergency leave. She didn't file any paperwork, didn't explain why, just wanted to know what she'd need if one day she suddenly couldn't come in. It made some believe Mary sensed something coming, or maybe she was preparing for something she couldn't yet explain. From a broader lens, Mary's story and Diane's reveal a truth many don't want to face, that even the most composed, respected, and safe women may be carrying burdens they can't share, not because they're weak, but because they're afraid. No one will believe them. Mary lived a thoughtful, orderly life. She was loved, respected, but in her most critical moment, when she needed to be seen, to be heard, no one realized the danger until it was too late. This wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a reminder that behind every polite smile, behind every pressed blouse, behind every "I'm fine," there may be a silent cry for help. Nearly a decade after Mary Shotwell Little vanished, a forgotten memory surfaced, not from an official file, but from the fading recollection of a retired Atlanta police officer. During a quiet gathering of former investigators, the officer recalled a man who had once been questioned say, building maintenance worker brought in weeks after Mary disappeared. At the time, it had seemed like nothing. The man had simply noted that he'd often seen Mary exiting the building via the basement elevator after hours rather than using the main lobby. In 1965, that wasn't seen as suspicious. The building was old. No cameras. No strict surveillance. A woman choosing a side exit might have just wanted to get to her car faster. But after Diane Shields, another bank employee, was also later seen using the same route before her murder, that memory took on chilling new weight. The maintenance worker was re-interviewed. This time, he admitted something more. He had seen Mary down there several times with a man, not her husband. A tall, well-dressed man who would be waiting near the end of the dim hallway. They never argued loudly, but the tension was clear. On one occasion, the man stepped toward her, and Mary instinctively backed away, but then followed him. Anyway, the worker hadn't thought much of it back then. There were no screams, no commotion, just a quiet meeting between two people in a place no one was watching. Had this detail been investigated seriously at the time, it might have opened an entirely different direction. But now, nearly 10 years later, whatever evidence once existed had long gone cold. Who was the man? What was his connection to Mary? Why meet in secret? No one had answers. And Mary could no longer tell her story. Around the same time, an independent investigation began taking shape. A group of retired officers, lawyers, and investigative journalists had grown frustrated by the silence and dead ends. They believed Mary's case had been mishandled, or, worse, that something had been missed, even hidden, in those early months. Their digging uncovered something unusual. In the Unsolved months leading up to her disappearance, citizens in Southern Bank, Mary's workplace, had been under internal review. Quiet inquiries were being made into questionable transactions involving high-value clients. No official record linked Mary to the probe, but former colleague remembered one odd thing: seeing Mary working late, reviewing financial statements she typically wouldn't have access to. At the time, it seemed like she was helping with an audit. But after her disappearance, that memory took on a different tone. Speculation began to grow. Had Mary discovered something? A suspicious money transfer? A pattern of fraudulent activity? When Mary said, "If I speak, someone will get hurt," maybe it wasn't about personal relationships. Maybe it was something far bigger. The independent group attempted to trace the original documents, but most had been destroyed under short-term storage policies. They reached out to former bank staff, but many had either moved away or passed on. A few declined to comment. And in their silence, a haunting possibility lingered. Maybe Mary had known something she wasn't supposed to. No. As these theories mounted, one thing became more disturbing than all the unanswered questions: the way Mary chose to handle it. She didn't panic. She didn't run. She didn't leave a note. But she also didn't tell anyone. Not about the anonymous flowers. Not about the man in the basement. Not about the silent phone calls. She bore it quietly, telling only one friend that she was considering speaking out, and that it could hurt someone. That silence, whether born of fear or dignity or a desire to protect others, became the costliest choice of all. It allowed whatever forces surrounded her to tighten, unchecked, until one night she vanished. That is the true heartbreak of Mary's story. She wasn't the first woman to feel that something was wrong but lacked the words or proof to speak it aloud. She wasn't the first to carry the weight of fear in silence, thinking no one would believe her. But she became one of the rare cases where that silence cost her everything. By this point, her case wasn't just a puzzle of facts. It had become a story about fear, about how isolation hides in plain sight, about the quiet agony of those who appear to be just fine, and about how society often overlooks the smallest warning signs until it's too late. Mary's last words on the matter might have been unspoken, maybe just a look, a pause, a half smile, when someone asked, "Is something wrong?" And she answered softly, "I'm fine." More than a decade after, Mary Shotwell Little's disappearance, her case had all but faded from the headlines. The press no longer ran weekly updates. Television programs stopped mentioning her name. But to her family, friends, and a quiet community of people who had never stopped watching, Mary was never forgotten. That's why, in 1979, a single letter stunned everyone who remembered her story. It came from an anonymous woman claiming she had once worked a temporary job at a small bank branch in Charlotte, North Carolina, in the fall of 1965. That was the same period when Mary's gas card had last been used in nearby Raleigh. The woman described a strange incident. A young woman came into the branch accompanied by two men. She seemed uneasy, maybe confused, but still went through with opening a temporary account. A few weeks later, the account and all its records disappeared without explanation. The timing, the location, the woman's description. It all sounded like Mary. A new theory emerged. Had Mary been forced to open that account? Was she being used as a clean-cut bank employee to facilitate a hidden transaction, money laundering, a front for something bigger? Mary, with her spotless image and banking background, would have been the perfect cover. But once she'd done what was needed, maybe she knew too much. But no one could verify the letter. The woman left no return address. After the story was published, she never came forward again. Some dismissed it as a publicity stunt. Others believed she had been silenced, or had gone silent out of fear. Whatever the truth, her account shattered the already fragile narrative. Suddenly, every previous theory seemed unstable. There were no clear heroes, no confirmed suspects, no solid ground to stand on. And that's when the real crisis of faith began. Not just for Mary's loved ones, but for the public. What started as a personal tragedy had become something far more unsettling, a mirror reflecting how fragile truth becomes with time, how facts disappear and memories fade, how systems that promise answers often collapse under their own weight. Some now believe Mary never left Atlanta, that she was killed the night she disappeared and the car was staged to confuse investigators. Others insist she was taken, silenced, forced to live under a new name, watching her old life vanish from afar. A few cling to the idea she left by choice, though that version defies everything people knew about her. Yet no matter which theory you believe, the most haunting part is this: a person, a living, breathing woman, vanished from a brightly lit parking lot in the heart of a city, surrounded by people. And after that, nothing. No definitive clues. No credible suspects. Just questions, echoing in the silence. Police were powerless. Her family was shattered. The public, once hopeful, grew weary, then indifferent. And what was once a symbol of justice slowly became another name slipping into obscurity. In that silence, something else happened. Trust began to erode, not just in the police, but in the system itself. The belief that justice would come for women like Mary, women who did nothing wrong, who trusted the world to keep them safe, crumbled. The promise that truth would prevail proved hollow. And for many, Mary became something more than a victim. She became a symbol of unfinished stories, of women who disappear without explanation, of cold files closed not because of closure, but because the trail grew cold. And even now, nearly 60 years later, we still can't answer the most basic question: what really happened to Mary Shotwell Little? Time passes like a river that never turns back. What once stirred the entire city of Atlanta is now reduced to a footnote buried in dusty police archives. But for Mary's family, and for those who never stopped wondering, the question, what really happened, has never aged. It lives on in every photo framed in a living room, every newspaper clipping carefully preserved, every whispered prayer during church services each October. Roy Little, the young husband she left behind, is now an old man with silver hair. He never remarried, never left Atlanta, and almost never spoke of Mary again. But some say that for many years he quietly sent flowers to Mary's mother's grave on her birthday. If that were the only way he had left to say, "I'm sorry I couldn't protect her." In the rare interviews they've given, those who once worked alongside Mary still speak of her with deep respect. A gentle woman, disciplined, kind. Always the one to ask, "Are you okay?" before talking about herself. A true friend, a model colleague, and then a disappearance no one could explain. Years later, one of the investigators who worked the case confessed, "We thought we'd close this in a few weeks, but every lead vanished. Still, I believe this. Someone knows something, and I hope someday they'll finally speak." Hope. Maybe that's the only thing left. Not a blind faith in perfect justice, but the quiet hope that one day, even if late, the truth will come to light, not to condemn, but to set someone free. Mary Shotwell. Little's story doesn't end with a trial, or a confession, or a funeral. If it ends at all, it ends with absence. An empty chair at family dinners. A desk no one ever returned to. A soft smile that disappeared from every photograph after 1965. But maybe that absence is what keeps her story alive. Because without closure, we can't let it go. It refuses to be forgotten. Because in that silence, there's a deeper question about how society protects the vulnerable, about how often we see without really noticing, listen without truly hearing. Maybe Mary knew something. Maybe she was just caught in a chain of terrifying coincidences. But whatever the truth, she deserves to be remembered, not just as a victim, but as a whole person, someone who lived, who loved, who believed the world was good. That's what this video hopes to preserve, not a conclusion, but a reminder that telling a story without an ending can still be an act of meaning. Because if we stop telling it, if we stop asking, if we stop remembering, then people like Mary don't just vanish from the world, they vanish from memory, and we can't let that happen.